As well, we're going to talk about somebody who is known for unleashing the power of Asian Canadian literature and making spaces for it to flourish. And now Vancouver's literary community is mourning his death. The legacy of Jim Wong Chu, who was the founder of Rice Paper magazine, inspired a lot of young Asian Canadian writers as well. We'll be hearing about him coming up after the news. Stay with us. World Report comes your way next. Well, good Thursday morning. I'm Stephen Quinn, sitting in for Rick Clough. This is the early edition on CBC Radio 1. Our top story in this half hour, Jim Wong Chu, a community leader in Vancouver who paved new ground for Canadian literature, has died. We're going to hear about the impact he had on the Asian Canadian and literary community and why he was considered such a pioneer. That coming your way in just a moment. Thank you, Amy. 12 minutes after 6 o'clock on the early edition on CBC Radio 1, 690 AM, 88.1 FM in Vancouver, and streaming live, cbc.ca/BC. Well, Vancouver's Asian Canadian literary community is in mourning. After months of battling complications from a stroke, Jim Wong Chu has died. He was a poet, an activist, and a mentor to many Canadian writers of Asian descent. He formed the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop in the late 1960s, which went on to create Rice Paper magazine. And he's worked with well-known authors like Madeline Tien, Wei-Sin Choi, Evelyn Lau, and Paul Yee. He is considered a literary pioneer who wanted to ensure that Asian Canadian voices were heard. And for more on his legacy, we are joined in studio by Todd Wong. He is the longest-serving board member of the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop and the organizer of the intercultural dinner event. Gung Haggis Fat Choi, good morning to you.
Hi, Stephen.
I'm sorry about the loss of your friend.
Yes.
How are you doing?
I'm doing okay.
Yeah. For people who didn't have a chance to ever meet Jim or to know anything much about him, just tell us a little bit more about who he was.
Oh, well, he was the man behind the scenes, behind Asian Heritage Month. I wanted to nominate him for, I think the City of Vancouver Awards for board members. He was a pioneer because he used to be on Penderguy Radio back in the 70s when going through identity, we're looking at how do we get integrated more into Canada? How do we get the Chinese voice, the pioneer voices represented? Because, we're coming out of the civil rights movement of the USA. Paul Yee had told me later, well, we're starting to look at everything. We need to get these voices out. And he says, well, why not? Let's get on radio. Let's start up a radio show. How about writing up poems? Poetry. This is how he published Chinatown Ghosts, writing his stories, taking pictures with photography. This is how he really started working into the community. And part of it for Jim was identity, because he was a paper son. And that meant that during the time of the Exclusion Act, he came over as somebody else's son on the birth certificate. And how do we get past that stigmatism of the systemic racism that Canada had for a long time?
What was Rice Paper kind of the culmination of everything he was trying to do? Because it really was significant.
Rice Paper was the only published magazine across North America that dealt with Asian Canadian literature, and we tried to expand it to arts and culture. It was hard to work with, and so it's gone online now, and to make it more accessible for people. Chinese culture, Asian Canadian culture is so diverse. Multi-generations like myself, plus new immigrants. How do you get all the stories in? We try to do everything and be everything, and it doesn't work for everybody. But to see that Madeline Tien, who won the Emerging Writers Award years ago to get simple recipes published, Jim would shop it around. He would shop the people who didn't win awards. He would spread the word. And that's what Jim was. He was a booster. He was a cheerleader of people. And it wasn't just Chinese Canadians. It was anybody he loved. And he would incorporate that. So to see Madeline Tien nominated for the Booker Award and to win the Giller Prize last year, we're so proud of her.
And it wasn't just her. I mean, he had an influence on a lot of Asian Canadian writers. I mean, you think about the success of somebody like Madeline Tin, if his goal was to bring that writing into the mainstream, wow, did he ever do it?
Yeah, and it's making friends with everybody. His friendship with Douglas McIntyre Books, obviously, here it's the book, Saltwater City. Mm-hmm. So he would talk with Paul, and I think the first idea was to have a book, and then we ended up creating the Saltwater City Museum exhibit celebrating 100 years of Vancouver history. Mm-hmm. And then somehow the City of Vancouver started the City of Vancouver Book Prize, and Paul's was the inaugural book chosen. There was no short list.
Wow.
Boosting everybody, the Asian Heritage Month. He started the precursor to that, the Go for Broke Review. And I remember interviewing him at the time when I was a student up at SFU. And Roy Miki, I interviewed him. Roy is such a pioneer for Japanese Canadian issues and everything else. But part of it is, how do you get these stories out to everybody?
Right.
Because they're all of Canada's stories.
What stories, what anecdotes come to mind when you want to reveal a little bit more about Jim? What comes to mind for you?
Starting the pioneer, the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop, our community pioneer dinner, because 2002 was the year that the Vancouver Public Library had the One Book, One Vancouver program. Wace and Choi, Jade Peony, that was the inaugural choice. There was no other choice. And that book, which went on to win many prizes, started as a short story, and Jim put it in a book, the anthology, I think was it Many Mouthed Birds, and Paul Yee was in town, so we started the dinner, and Jim says, hey, we can't just recognize these guys. We have to recognize the history. And we recognized Roy Ma, World War II veteran, who had started the Chinatown News. Mm-hmm. How do you make all the stories, because everything's related? And that's Jim.
How do you think he's going to be remembered?
Well, right now we're trying to remember and help his wife Marlene, because she's been so busy helping him in the hospital after the stroke. Mm-hmm. He's being remembered, and I saw on Facebook that people said he was a great man. He boosted so many people. He cheerleaded for so many people. He was humble, and he inspired people. And I think his legacy is going to be us carrying on that inspiration.
Todd, it's good to see you. Thank you so much.
Excellent.
Again,
Thank
my
you.
condolences on the loss of your friend.
Very good.
Todd Wong, the longest-serving board member of the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop, also the organizer of the intercultural dinner event Gung Haggis Fat Choi, talking about Jim Wong Chu, who has passed away. 20 minutes after 6 o'clock.